Earlier this week on this program, Canadians learned where the new Conservative leader stands on the country's Paris climate targets. Have a listen.
I'm committed to that through partnering with provinces, not an Ottawa knows best approach, as we've seen with the carbon tax. We weren't solid enough on this issue in the last few years, and when we said to people we were against the carbon tax because it was unfair, it was uncompetitive, we had to say what we were for, and that's what I will do.
At the same time, Erin O'Toole says one of his top priorities is addressing Western alienation and bringing back jobs in the energy sector. That's a quote from him. So will O'Toole, as a Conservative leader, take some of the fuel out of the Alberta separatist movement, or will he fan the flames? If only I could have gotten that one out right. Jay Hill is the interim leader of the Wexit Party and a former Conservative MP. He joins us now from Calgary, I believe. Hi, Mr. Hill. Good to see you.
Hi, Vashi.
Welcome back.
Good to be here.
Welcome back to the program. So let's talk a little bit about Erin O'Toole. He's the new Conservative leader. Right off the bat, I listened to his initial press conference. He talked about his first conversation with the Prime Minister, in which the Prime Minister called him to congratulate him on his win. He says the first issue he brought up was Western alienation and that the federal government needs to do more to address it. Do you not believe that Mr. O'Toole is seized with that issue?
Well, he certainly didn't show that, as you indicated with your opening comments and that quote from him, Vashi, when he moved very quickly early in his tenure to state both that he wants to consolidate the recognition of Quebec as a nation, whatever that means. And then he went on to say that a Conservative government, obviously led by him, would commit to the Paris climate targets. And I think everyone is well aware that those targets would involve the carbon tax, which the West has fought for the last year or two, increasing, not decreasing. So it seems to me that once again we see a Prime Minister wannabe from Central Canada. He is, after all, a lawyer from Toronto, talking more to Central Canada and specifically to Quebec than he is to the West.
So let's pick that apart for a second, because, I think I'm not sure how acknowledging certain interests in Quebec is necessarily saying that you're going to ignore things in the West. And also when it comes to the Paris climate targets, saying that his government is going to adhere to one, he's also very specifically said that he won't continue with the federal carbon tax. Like, I'm not saying that's possible, or, I'm not getting into the science of it, but I'm telling you what he has promised that he will do, and that is not continue with the federal carbon tax.
Yeah, well, then he needs to explain very clearly, especially for our oil and gas industry that's so hard pressed here in Western Canada. He needs to explain very clearly what it is that he means if he's going to remove the carbon tax and yet commit to the Paris targets, because I don't see how he's going to do both.
So he says in his section, I looked up in his platform, he has a page. You talk about Quebec. Yes, he has a lot of things that he wants to do for Quebec. He also has a page on an action plan, he calls it, for Alberta and the West. The first thing he says is fix equalization. Second, stop the discrimination against Alberta in the fiscal stabilization program. He'll pass a National Strategic Pipelines Act, which he says will expedite the process of getting pipelines that are in the national interest built. Why isn't that enough for someone like yourself who wants to see the specific interests expressed by people in Alberta addressed? Like, this is these are pretty specific.
Well, they are pretty specific, as you say, Vashi. But the point is that Westerners have heard this type of thing from leaders and promises during elections many, many times in the past. Certainly, I was on the other side making some of those promises. And so the proof is in the pudding, as us old timers like to say. And the reality is that, for example, let's just pick one of those and say he's going to fix the equalization program to make it more fair and more balanced. It's enshrined in the Constitution, thanks to Mr. Trudeau's father. How is he going to do that? How is he going to convince those provinces that are the recipients of the tax transfers from Alberta and Saskatchewan and the West? How is he going to fix that without their say-so? What is he going to have to trade off to Quebec in order to get that? He doesn't say. And, pardon me for being extremely skeptical after all of the years I spent down in Ottawa and in the House of Commons, but I just don't see the detail of how he's going to accomplish that. It's all fine to have those, jotted down in your election platform, but the proof will be in how he actually delivers it. And I don't see that.
You said, Mr. Hill, that in your time in Ottawa, you made those promises as well. Why couldn't you fulfill them?
Well, more accurately, I think you'd have to ask Mr. Harper that question.
You were a part of his government.
I left in 2010. He had a majority government. Prior to that, we had minorities similar to what Mr. Trudeau has right now. And a minority government makes it very difficult, especially when it's a conservative one with all three of the other parties aligned against you in order to get anything passed and anything agreed to. And I think you'd have to agree to that, Vashi, that until Mr. Harper achieved his majority in 2011, our hands were very tightly bound as far as what we could accomplish.
But there were 4 years after that in which there was a majority mandate, right? I'm just asking because you're expecting a lot of Mr. O'Toole and you're expecting a lot of whoever's in power, but you're admitting that even when you couldn't accomplish the things that you wanted to.
Well, as I just finished saying, Vashi, is that I hate to repeat myself because time is short. But the reality is that you'd have to ask Mr. Harper and his cabinet from 2011 to 2015 when he had a majority. And a majority in our system is actually the way you get things done. In a minority, it's much, much more difficult. And as I said, even more difficult if you're a conservative minority than a conservative or a liberal minority, rather.
So help me understand. I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, you voted in the Conservative leadership race?
Yes, I did, yeah.
And why did you do that if you think that the party, regardless of who leads it, can't represent the interests that you think should be represented?
Well, because whether we gain better autonomy and fairness through constitutional reform or by the establishment of an independent nation, either of those, Vashi, are going to take years to accomplish. We understand that. This is not going to be a process that ends in a few days or a month or two. This is going to take some time. And so I still believe that the country as a whole would be better served by a conservative government. And therefore, my children and grandchildren would be better served by a conservative government. And therefore, that's why I chose to cast my ballot one last time in the Conservative leadership race.
But by drawing support away from the Conservatives towards your separatist movement, aren't you making it harder for what you just said to actually happen?
No, not at all. This is a common fallacy, and you'll hear it a lot if we end up in an election campaign anytime soon, this whole fear of vote splitting. When I went through 3 consecutive Liberal majority governments under the tenure of Jean Chrétien, the reality of the vote splitting there was mostly in central and eastern Canada, where the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservatives at the time split the vote and allowed Liberals to win in a multitude of ridings. That is not going to happen with Wexit Canada candidates, because we're only going to run in Western Canada. We're only going to probably, if the election comes quickly, we'll probably only be organized in very safe, predominantly conservative seats. And so the vote splitting is a non-issue for us.
Even in BC, for example, or Manitoba, where things are closer than they are in Alberta and Saskatchewan?
Well, as I say, that's not where our strength is. Our strength is in Alberta, Saskatchewan, rural British Columbia, and parts of rural Manitoba. If you look at the results, 49 of the 104 seats in Western Canada were won by Conservatives with huge majorities. Even if you split the support in half, you're still only going to either elect a Conservative or a Wexit candidate to be your member of Parliament, not one of the other 3 parties. So it's erroneous to suggest that Wexit Canada is somehow going to split the vote and allow Liberals to win.
Okay, I have so many other questions for you, but I've got about only 30 seconds left in my entire show, so I have to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Hill. Appreciate your time as always.
My pleasure.
Jay Hill is the interim leader of the Wexit Party and a former Conservative MP. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.